generally consumable. We are at 2.2 right now. We hope to be shipping 16.07 early next year.
Okay, so from my side, we have DPK started to maintain it in Ubuntu. We started with 2.0, which was our 15.10 release, Wiley. And since then, we always updated with every release. Currently, we just shipped 16.07 with the Active, and it's working fine. Since 16.04, we realized that there are internal users like at Brocade, at Canonical, and even more. So in the initial slide, you have seen some of the Naro folks on there, BPP, Fido. So we joined forces and said, okay, instead of working against each other and causing all kind of churn by maintaining different things between distributions and products, we just join, discuss before it happens, and do it in one way. So that way, we work together on DevDPK. If anybody is also using Debian-based things, feel free to join us, coordinate with us what you need and what your stuff is. So that's good. And the presentation itself, as introduced, is first a little bit of history, like what we faced. Most of you just say, oh yeah, I remember, that's good. And then what we think could be next stages, which fortunately kind of resonate with all we heard already. So that's perfect. We're not like the big offenders.
So challenges, what might those be? So let's get this out of the system. API versioning, API breakages. That is the single greatest pain point for any distribution, for all users of stable distribution especially. Now, to be fair, things used to be worse, and they're getting better and better and better. The linker script is quite helpful for building, and since 2.2 there are a lot of improvements, and it keeps getting improved. We can now do individual packages for each library, which is how it's supposed to be. But API breakages are really painful, and I want to explain why they are. Now, most of you are Linux gurus, I expect, and know how distributions work. But for those who don't, bumping the API in a library might be a multi-week process. It means that you need to start from libfoo2, for example, and then you go to libfoo3. Now, you can't just upload it. You need to do what's called booking a transition slot. So when your turn is up, then you can upload libfoo3 in the simplest case. And that is mostly automated process kicks off, and all your dependents gets rebuilt and re-uploaded mostly automatically to the archive. And when all the dependents have switched dependency from libfoo2 to libfoo3, then libfoo2 gets booted off the archive. This is the simplest case. Unfortunately, we are not quite there yet. One of the problems we have with DPDK is that we have so many libraries in there, and they have their own API version that gets broken individually. So if in, say, 16.11 I have 5 libraries with a broken API and 15 others are the same, I cannot upload at the same time 16.07 and 16.11 and do this automated transition, because the 15 libraries that are the same will have a clash. They have the same name, the same file. I cannot have both of them together. So this makes the transition even more painful and manual and longer.
Yeah.
And so we are going to have some suggestions later on how to maybe improve the situation, and of course for the open discussion later as well. Yeah. So we have a few, we have right now OpenVSwitch as a dependent, and we've seen just now collectd is one of the candidate. We have tried to work to have that automatically work with PDK in Debian and Ubuntu. And on the horizon, I think we'll have Open Data Plane, and maybe VPP2 would like to consume the package as is from Debian or Ubuntu to make things easier and more maintainable for them, which is the entire point of having a package in a distribution.
Yeah. And then the next part, which we had in the past, is there's not only a library when providing a library, but especially when you have some active program or some things that you have to prepare, the users expect some sort of runtime environment around. That has never been an issue in the past because DPDK had been exploited by custom applications that handled and configure and manage themselves. But for distribution and any sort of generic availability, people just expect to do something like, I can have a config file instead of the admin typing and stuff or writing its own shell script. That's just not the way it's supposed to work. It's supposed to work the same way, if possible, across distributions, across versions. And that's some bits that we provided to make the consumption of DPDK easier. That's part of the spirit when I see that DPDK is trying to grow from an application static link thing to something like a generically available part. That is also a bit that is not to be missed. It's not a binary part of the library, but it's part of the ecosystem around. And that's also part of what we will try to contribute and see what the discussion will get out of that. So yeah, I mean, eventually you all saw, or you all know how to install DPDK and some solution based on. Here was a blog linked, which is just, if you're not all that good that we are, you can still try and have in 5 minutes running Open vSwitch DPDK with just a few commands. So stuff like that can be helped by runtime bits.
Another pain point is, why do we have to build twice if we want a static and a shared library? It's the same objects, but we cannot just say build static and shared. It's either or. Now this is a problem because for distributions it's common to ship both. So your dev package will have your static libraries, and then you have individual packages with each SO. Now, contrary to common belief, it's not forbidden in Debian and Ubuntu to statically link. It's heavily discouraged, but it is allowed, and that's why it's the part of the process is shipping those static libraries as well. And in our packaging system, we have to do the first build and get the static libraries out, throw it out, and then do the second build and have the shared libraries. This is really a waste of time and effort.
It's hard maintenance.
Yes, it makes maintenance much harder. Now, one more thing we worked on is to allow for consumers of our source package rather than the binary to easily swap in their config file, because as far as we know, one of the very most common things users might want to do is to have their own DPDK config file. So in our package, we have a simple environmental variable mechanism where you can point the package build to your own config file, DPDK config file, instead of the default one. This way, consumers can just rebuild our package as is with one more variable, and it makes it much easier to share our progress and our code with everyone. The second thing, we touched on that briefly, out of 3 kernel modules. Distributions hate them, and that is, someone said, and it is true, they are the stuff of evil, because it makes maintenance really, really harder. Now, the standard way to deal with this is a system called DKMS, the Dynamic Kernel Module Salami or system or whatever. Basically, you ship the code, the kernel module code, and when the user installs it, it will be built at that time against their kernel version. Because as we know, the in-kernel ABI is not intentionally stable for very good reasons. So you can't just ship one kernel, binary kernel module out of 3 in a distribution and expect it to work forever. You need to rebuild it. So this system takes care of it, and that is the default that we chose for our package. Now, something else I've made available, which is a pre-built kernel module as well. Now, for other use cases, for example, if you build an ISO, an image that you ship to networking telcos, they like to have images to install. They don't want packages. So what I provide there is, again, an optional way to just point the package build to your kernel source that you are targeting for your image, and have a binary kernel module automatically generated with its own package that you can ship to your ISO. Because, of course, if you ship the DKMS only, you need a build system. And you don't want a router that ships to customers in the telcos and say, oh yeah, by the way, you let GCC make build essentials and all of that. And when you boot, you don't have a kernel module, you need to wait for the build to happen. So we have made this available as well.
Yeah, and another challenge that we face is, that is not to offend anybody. I guess the quality was already good, but still we faced many severe bugs in like a year ago, and it's getting better now. And also, one has to understand why, in my opinion, that was happening. So we had like crashes and mem leaks every other week, patches for that, which somebody considered it should never happen, but it just does, but it's fine. So the reason is, why was that so high? That's part of the change in philosophy. So in the past, you had all the specific vendors using their statically linked DPDK. They tested for themselves, and I'm pretty sure their use cases and their paths, they were pretty solid, tested to the end, always fine. And then if you do 2 things, that means they probably had custom patches to fix some of those paths, not yet contributed for just the work of backporting forward, or no fun to discuss. And the other one is, in a generic sense, there's just way more paths through a library than just one use case. There's way more. So that was, in my opinion, the reason why DPDK about a year ago appeared so extra brittle, while on the other hand there were so much solutions already saying, oh, we are based on DPDK and it's fast and it's nice. So it's kind of a split appearance if you just look at the mailing list in the market. So it gets better, and all the discussion we had on shared CI for different systems, that might help to make that less likely to happen in the future. So let's get to some opportunities, some ideas. Most of that was already talked about by Bruce, by Thomas. So let's just get into it, and eventually, John will also steer a few ideas later on. So we have a long open discussion at the end where we can kind of try to agree on ways to go, and some of those topics seem to be already kind of agreed in the audience and on what breaks that we have. So the first thing is path optimization, which is not to be mixed up with all the CPU compile optimization we had before. Path optimization just means examples like we had, I think on adding flags to the buffer somewhere, where it was like one party said, we don't need that per packet, we just want it from the device. And the other said, yeah. So there are always different preferred paths. Some have a hot path here, the other somewhere else. For those things, DPK really needs to, community-wise, all the participating people really need to adopt a behavior of, okay, I know I can easily make a patch for my product in 2 days and it works. Go the extra 3 days to suggest it and make it at least init time configurable. The patch is trivial if you say at compile time I decide if it's device or packet based, but that's not helping any generic distribution or any reuse by other products. The little bit is that at least on initializing your context in the DPDK, you should be able to select either or the other behavior if there is no general community agreement on the way to go. And for example, yesterday, there was no agreement that either packet or device would be good. There were different use cases, but there can be a little bit extra effort to say, okay, let's make both available, and the user of the DPDK application can select one or the other. So that's one optimization. The other one was the pretty much discussed CPU optimization, which just goes the same way. We already had a lot of suggestions with target clone, manual adds. I just want to say, from all the libraries I've worked on with the past, other than DPDK, they all started with, oh, it's easy to compile manually, going to, why don't you ship multiple versions, multiple binaries? If ever tried, it failed. So the path you already started of doing stuff runtime detectable is the only way going reasonable into a wide community. So I highly appreciate the effort already, and so I just hope that goes on. To some extent, this is a perfect topic since about everybody seems to agree it's important because they know from a manual optimization path. And also, most people agree on there are 4 or 5 options, whatever of them works is good. But there's missing the guy who says, okay, I'll do it, I have a half year left. So whoever has some sort of budget decision making, get your people to raise their hand. So that's for later on. So we have a whiteboard to get raising hands noted down. No? Okay, another one is good. So Roni talked about the Mellanox support, and I liked what it can do with the direct DMA, so that's cool. And I have relations from Ubuntu to Power, which ask for that. The problem is, being a generic distribution again, it's great, but it only works with the Mellanox OFAT distribution. And that's not so much a DPDK than more an Open Fabrics talk. The open version of the libIb-verbs is not compatible with what is in DPDK. So again, if that should be open and generic Debian, Ubuntu, whatever, I guess it's not that much different for Red Hat, anything, should ship MLX drivers, make it available, easy to consume. We just can't build it because those we only have the normal open fabrics version of the drivers because that's what the different manufacturers agreed upon. If we pick just Mellanox, we kick out the others, and I never want to be the one who kicks all that political shitstorm on me. So if there could somebody say, okay, let's make the bit to make it happen and be compilable. It's okay if it misses one extra offload. That's fine. It might be a bit better with a custom thing for a custom solution. That's fine. But generically, everything in DPDK, being a library, should work in a general open environment with just the normal libs around. That's one more thing here. And then that's the comeback to the ABI discussion. The dependencies, you already introduced how the transition works. if something like that happens, you can end up with the worst that can happen, which is, if we have this libfoo2 to update from 1 to 2, and we have 2, we just have the example, we have OpenVSwitch and collectd. Think of one of those is capable of the new API, the other one is not. So what should we do? Should we just say, okay, we're not updating the library, not getting any of the security fixes, speed fixes, exploitation of new hardware? Okay, you all agree that's a no-go, right? Okay, but what else do we do? Do we just drop one of the applications? Everybody who ever used that will have a huge regression and complain. So for that reason, a suggestion to be made and open for discussion then later on in the open session is, there are two things. One is, as Luca pointed out, the current per library versioning creates collisions of files. So DPTK 1607 collides with 1604 in like 17 of 19 libs. We need some sort of top level SO name or even overall ABI to be able to install both. For the cases where this happens, that one of the dependencies exploits a new version or not, that you can as a distribution decide, okay, for that, it's worth to provide both libraries in one release. And the other thing is that I talked to a lot of people around that, and it seemed that my suggestion was vocal by someone else as well. The pace of DPTK is great for all the fast development that it needs. But I think it would be a wise decision to limit externally visible ABI bumps to a slower pace, like every other or every year or every LTS release. So for discussion what the right time would be, and to not hold back code to, at the end of the year, hit a huge pack of everything changes. It might be a comeback, something like the RT and Next ABI or something to kind of pre-enable testing and build of that. But nevertheless, I think reducing at least the breakage of API ABIs would be a big improvement in the maintainability for any distribution out there later on. So that's pretty much a topic we want to talk about later on as well.
So stable trees, yes, it was a welcome return of the stable tree. I think it was tried for 2.2 and it didn't quite work out. So we are quite happy with this, as we explained before, and I'm going to explain now. This is very important for distributions. And now, not only for the ABI bump, which again, as Christian said, and we explained, it's really painful, but it makes maintenance for us maintainers so much easier. Now, when we wrote these slides, it was a bit slower, but now I think it's ramping up. There were like 40 patches or so in the stable tree.
Yeah.
So we want to say thank you to the maintainer and to everyone who sent patches to the stable tree, because this is really, really important. And now, one thing to consider once you start adopting stable trees in your model for development is backward maintainability. Now, as Christian said, as we know, DPTK moves really fast, innovates and changes, and refactor happens. Now, that's fine, that's part of the lifetime of a software, and it's great to make things better, to make improve libraries and make them more readable and so on, and more modular and so on and so forth. But one thing that should be kept in mind, not block this, but kept in mind, is backward maintainability, which means if a big refactor happens in your library and then 3 months later you have a critical bug fix or a security fix on that library, now backporting that fix that was done on top of the refactor library back to the stable tree might prove quite challenging. Very hard, if not impossible. Now imagine getting a commit on the top of the latest head of the DPTK and trying to apply that to 2.0 or 1.8. There would be a huge effort. Now, so one way to mitigate this might be to have good documentation of the changes in the refactoring in the patch headers or the commit messages, so that when you go back or other people go back and try to backport things, they can see where things moved. Again, I'm going to talk about how distributions work. Again, most of you will know this, but I know there's at least one guy from Microsoft in the room, so the golden rule for a stable distribution is better the bugs you know than the bugs you don't know. This means once Debian and Ubuntu stable ship, no more version bumps, with very few exceptions that have to be pre-approved. Of course, no API breakage. Once your distribution is stable, your libraries will never, ever, ever be allowed to break API ever again for the lifetime of the distribution, which is 2, 4, 7 years, which is a long time. Now, the only thing we are allowed to do in a stable distribution is critical or security fixes as out-of-tree queued patches on top of the version that was there when it shipped. This is why the upstream stable tree is fundamental, because for me, going and getting from a library of DPK that I know about, but I'm not very familiar with, and extracting a fix and backporting it 4 years back, that takes me 10 times, 20 times the amount of work it would take for the developer of that library that does the change.
Yeah. So I might add, it's also a loss for the community. So just yesterday, Keith and I realized we actually did the same work for DPK2 too, backporting fixes. So just it's a community sense of doing at least that stuff of maintenance together.
Yes. Yes. So please do try to collaborate with the stable tree. We try ourselves because again it is very important. Now, so Ubuntu 16.10 shipped with DPK 16.07. We have 16.07 in the Debian new queue now. So when you first push a new package to Debian, it has to be manually approved. You know, the copyright and the licenses are checked by the FTP masters. We hope this will be done in a couple of weeks. And once that is up, but the work is done. So after that has been approved and it's in the archive, we want to have 16.11 before Debian 9 ships. The freeze is next month, and the hard freeze in February, and probably ship around March or April. Now, again, many of you will know this, but from the security point of view, the way that distribution like Debian and Ubuntu work, and in general also, is that if you have a bad security bug that you find as a researcher, you usually contact the developer and say, hey, I found this exploit, I have reproduced. And the developer said, oh yeah, that's actually a bad one, we might get a CV. Now if it's really bad enough, usually the distribution security teams get involved as well, so that at the same time when the CV is disclosed and the new version of the stable tree is released with the fix, the distributions also already have a new version of the package ready to be published in the archive, so that your user are not exposed for a long period of time to unknown, broken and security vulnerable piece of code. Now for DPDK, especially being network facing, I don't know if this has been an issue in the past, but it could be. So we wanted to mention here, one way to contact the security team of Debian is sending a GPG encrypted email, and the fingerprint is there for verification. You can also see me and Christian for Debian Ubuntu, again for verification, that's a fingerprint. And for Ubuntu there's a page on Launchpad to report a security fix. So something interesting would be to ask if, maybe later in the discussion, if anyone has seen security-related issue with DPDK, if anyone like come to you as the maintainers saying, hey, we are researchers, we found this.
That's the point. Does anybody know of researchers already looking into that, or might it be worth to share some effort with like universities or whoever is usually doing that to make it even more stable? Because after the bugs come the security bugs, and that's the one which even get worse press.
Indeed.
So, runtime unification, we mentioned that we have some sort of runtime, and part of our effort, what we want to do is, we want to contribute not only our packaging, but also runtime bits into DPDK.org, or wherever it might be hosted the next few months. It's then again an open discussion that we want to have, to be like, it's surely discussable how we do it, but eventually if we agree to do it the same way in all distributions around, that's surely a help to make DPDK updates going along with the needed changes in the runtime environment, which makes it even more viable and healthy around the thing.
So again, a few words of how distributions work for Debian and Ubuntu. Now, Debian Unstable is a rolling distro, so it's as bleeding edge as the individual maintainers want to make it be. And then after 5 or 10 days that your package is unstable, it automatically migrates to testing, unless there's an RC bug. And every 2 years, Debian freezes the status of testing, fixes the RC bugs, and then releases as stable, and rinse and repeat. Ubuntu derives most of the packages, I think, from Debian. They are synced every month or so from Debian Unstable.
They're auto-synced almost whenever, but the point is most of the Ubuntu developers are Debian developers, so it's not like different parties at all.
Yes, so they are synced, or there's some patches and that is on top of that. Ubuntu has 16.04 before, I believe, and now we'll have 16.07 and 16.11 in common, hopefully, going forward. So the DepDPK project we have is the place where we coordinate. I keep my branches for Debian stable releases, Christian will keep his for the Ubuntu stable releases, but we really want to contribute this package and this runtime work back to the community. We'll still have our repository for these reasons.
Yeah, even if it's upstream DPK, we will always have our per release to decide what backport is word for word.
Or patches and so on.
Yeah. So, thank you a lot. I mean, the community is great, and as you've seen, like with lessons learned and stuff, most of what we had in the past got addressed. Maybe we're sitting here in a year again and say, oh, all we reported is good. We have better ABI thing, better merging security, all that
system.
So, yeah, so thank you all. And also thanks the wider part of our team, probably.
Yes.
So that's probably the most important part. So it's not only the two of us, there are people from Fido helping us, so Ed and CJ. There's also Ricardo from
Linaro.
Yeah, from Linaro.
He did the ARM64 build. Yeah.
For example, and Santiago. So everybody contributed different things, and that's like a little community inside the DBDK community, which we want to thank.
Yes, we have IRC and mail list if you want to come and visit us if you have any questions, of course.
So with that, I think it's time for John to add even more to the potential open discussion, and we try to look decorative over here.
And I guess we get questions as part of the bigger discussion.
Yeah, we were asked to summarize the question of one thing, so
yes. Thank you.
From here, I guess the crew there can change to John's. Unless there's an emergency prior to John open question, but we'll do that as well.
Yeah, I just have a few slides, so we'll go through those quickly and then we can move on to a general question and answer session. So, usability of DPK. We had this discussion last year in the hotel down the road, and the reason for it was there had been DPK had been evolving. We moved from kind of a developer-centric community where the usability concerns were about, oh yeah, how can I compile this, how can I get this to run as fast as possible, to a situation where we were getting, downstream consumers. The packagers and the open source vendors were, just getting involved and whatever, and projects like OVS. And in particular at that stage, just before the user space kicked off last year, there was a post on the OVS mailing list where they were saying that they didn't consider DPDK stable, or at least OVS plus DPDK didn't consider it stable, and they listed a few reasons, and one of them was around usability. So we had a session like this, and we, kind of got people to say what they did, what we could improve, how we might improve it. We wrote them down, and we took them away. I put them on the mailing list, and then over the year, we okay.
We're still switching our slides.
Okay. Hey, there we go. Good. So we just look at the usability from last year quickly, and then what progress we've made in the last 12 months around usability, and then what we can do in the next year. And that really ties in very much to the points the guys were bringing up and the point that Thomas was making earlier on. So there's about 3 slides here of the things that we wrote on the whiteboard last year, and kind of the progress we made in them. So I've kind of ranked them in the ones that we got finished first to make it make everybody happy, make it look like we had some progress, which we did. Create a mailing list. Thomas did that. That's very good. Now that's gets people onto DPDK who might be a bit frightened by the thousands of patches that go by on the dev mailing list every day, and they can go on there and ask questions. And Thomas does a good job of keeping people polite on there to newbies. I mean, they're maybe newbie to DPDK, but they're like in a lot of cases very experienced developers and from other communities, but they're just kicking the tires. Make DPDK.org website patchable. That's patchable now, and if there's a mailing list for that, I think web@dpdk.org, and Harry submits patches, we submit patches, Thomas puts patches up, and then the guys from Semi have sent one through to update the documentation on the website on training, so that's good. That's good. A contributors guide, yeah, we did that. I added a contributors guide as part of all our different contributors guides. Also the landing page on dpdk.org explains that. I think people still seem to be struggling when they come to the mailing list about how to submit patches, and people kind of still have a little bit of learning, but we can point them here at least, and they can read that. Add a README, yeah, seems basic. We didn't have one at a high level, you expect us, the story some years ago about some American city that wanted to develop their downtown, so they had this big plan to spend millions of dollars to reinvigorate their downtown, but somebody just suggested that they put up signs around the city pointing to downtown and not actually have a downtown, and then that would solve the thing. So we have a README now, so at least it's there, so that's good. Mempool debugging, so actually Luca did that via Valgrind. Valgrind's should be everybody's favorite tool, it's a great tool, but didn't really work with DPK mempools. So that was actually, that's a good solution, because that's using an existing tool that people are familiar with rather than trying to write a bespoke tool.
It's exactly the same difference in how you use command lines or anything. Unfortunately, it's not upstream yet. I sent the patches, but ignored, which is not nice. But it's on GitHub, so you can search for Valgrind DPK on GitHub and find my repository. You can build it.
So that's why I left out the last little bit here. But maybe if people use it a bit more, and then we could, ping the Valgrind developers and say, hey, look, this is actually very useful, and they might see people use. So that's something you should familiarize yourself with. Make the latest version of the docs available. We can do that. That's not kind of complete, but that was something suggested, but again, it's not something that people ask for a lot, and generally the documentation doesn't get completed until the end of the release. So there's a very kind of a small window where we don't have kind of a latest docs. If the docs are getting updated more frequently, we could address that and close that out properly. Issues with config files. There was a lot of discussion about config files. I'll summarize by saying there's too many options turned off and on by default. And I think we've got better at kind of minimizing the changes into at least the configuration, and kind of better at kind of organizing our configuration. More sample apps. So yeah, we have two groups: people who want more sample apps, people who want less sample apps. So, it's kind of the same aim. We want better quality sample apps, and we got some good ones during the year. And we have a good system of, if you submit a sample app, it shows a kind of a core functionality, and then you have some documentation that explains, what's going on, how to compile and run the app. But also generally kind of a small walkthrough of the code to explain what's going on. So that's good, but yeah, we can take the people's points like Thomas. Maybe there's some of this should be moved out into a separate place. RT malloc, suggested by Stephen, said that people were using RT malloc too much when just malloc would do. I think we've got better at that, not completely, but just a reminder to people: you don't always need to use RT malloc if it's not going to be on the fast path. If it's just basic configuration, good old malloc will do. Logging and debugging via secondary process. Yeah, I think that became kind of a bit clearer during the year. I think there's still a lot of work around this primary secondary process. It works. It's a bit hacky. It's a bit kludgy. It could be improved, and I think we need a kind of a discussion of how we fix this. Basically, what's the right path forward for our primary and secondary process handling. Distributed testing and continuous testing. Yeah, everybody saw this, as a gap last year. There was a lot of talk about 0 day, whatever. In the meantime, VPP came along and Fido, and we saw how it could be done, and hats off to those guys for taking a difficult task and showing how it can be done right. So we know that what we can aim for. But at the same time, we did make try to address this during the last year, and there was a lot of work done by our test team. And you will see a lot of automated emails, especially if you submit a patch that breaks something on some system that you may not have been testing on. You should get an email. It's not quite where we want it yet, but we can move towards that, and I think Chan will be doing a presentation on that later on. Improve the build system. Yeah, I think Bruce, and this was touched earlier on. So make install needs to be improved. That was improved, and I think we got that better. Not completely. I think we can still do, but it behaves more rationally now, I think. Use kconfig. This was put out there last year. That was tried internally as a kind of proof of concept by Dave Hunt, and it looked quite good, especially if you're used to that whole kconfigure for interface for configuring the kernel, and Dave plugged it into the config files, and you could drill down through them. It looked quite good. We could push it up. I guess kconfig is under GPL, so we can put up there, you know, as a separate application, or we might have to look at how we link against it and stuff like that. But, you know, if there was interest in that, we could possibly push it up. Better support for cross-compilation. Jan Victorin suggested this last year because he was, and probably still is, not compiling on the target architecture for which he was running. I put that as a small bit, because I don't know, because you haven't been complaining the last year, so I don't know if it's some progress, but possibly we still need more work there. Yeah, probably. Yeah, we can talk about that. And use auto tools and configure. Yeah, you know, it's a solution, but not one that people generally want to get into. Okay, so other ones, debuggability. Again, and this was one of the things that the OVS post had highlighted, our debuggability was poor. We're still only okay on this, I would say. Maybe the first point says there's a user expectation that tools like TCP dump and IP and, you know, ifconfig and stuff like that will work as expected. They don't. You know, and well, there's still a discussion there about how these can be fixed. But we made some progress, especially we're on the pdump library. Debug tools, hooks for FI callbacks. The pdump library uses those, but that's not kind of a generally external feature, so that's only like at 20%. Add or extend a solution based on KNI. Didn't get to that, but that could have, yeah, or the KNI replacement. Use systemd naming algorithm for KNI. I think that didn't get much traction. Have a default for -n, that got done, and some of the other config options got defaults during the year, so the EAL improved. That got better. The suggestion, I put these up because we recorded them last year, and I sent them to the mailing list. But, you know, not all of them had a lot of traction or a lot of backing. Moving EAL to the kernel didn't really get much traction. Too much duplicated code in the PMDs. Stephen highlighted this last year. I would say that's still the case. We've made some improvements on that, but there's still a lot of copying and pasting between the pole mode drivers, and we really need somebody to, you know, it's a bit of work, a bit of tidy up work, a clean up work to make it consistent. But, you know, everybody would get the benefit in any new pole mode driver. So that's still there. That's still a task if, you know, people like waiting, you know, yak shaving basically. And running DPK applications as non-root was suggested last year. Yeah, we didn't make any progress on that. It's partially green because Mellanox can do it, as pointed out. And so these were features, kind of usability features that came in the last year that weren't called out but came in anyway. So we had the pdump library, which is kind of a packet capture library. The problem we found getting the pdump library, and I spoke to Morten about this, is that there wasn't kind of a one-size-fits-all. Some people wanted just to find out where their ping into OBS was going. Some people wanted to capture at line speed, you know, so it was kind of difficult to get something. The solution we put in place shows how you can do it for a kind of middle ground. It works, it allows you to do packet capture, it shows how it can be done. It also shows how, you know, if you want to take that and put your own callbacks in to do it at high speed, you can. Man pages, not usually exciting for everybody, but thanks to Christian, anybody like me who started off on kind of Sun systems, you know, that were networked together but not networked to anything else, you know, relied heavily on man pages for everything. And if you look up the man page for something like date and read to the bottom of it, there's kind of interesting little nuggets of Unix history in there. So that was great, and it also feels more like a real product now that it has man pages. How to docs, we have a new section there which is good, which allows people to put things in that don't necessarily fall into the category of an application, but they have things like how maybe how bifurcation works, or how you can make it work, how you could do live migration. There's a few things, so it's an opportunity for other people who might want to do, you know, small chunks in there. We got some developers and contributors tools in the last year, kind of a wrap up of the kernel check patch. And that's good, and that's kind of, I think we have a very consistent format for patches now. Overall, it can still be improved, but we can point people to these, and generally it comes back. The patches are good, and also the log check. So we have a very consistent commit messaging. Consistent naming of the DPK tools. I think Christian did this as well, so that's good. We have everything is starts with a DPK prefix now, and it's the kind of things where it doesn't you can make up names for applications, put them together, and which is fine until it scales out to people who need to package it, and you're stamping on somebody else. So these are kind of the considerations that the downstream consumers have fed back in. Improvements for and by the open source vendors, and we saw that in the previous presentations. Stable and LTS releases. So 1607 was the first stable release. And we have a slide here to say it. Does anybody know the book by Edward Tufte that's called The Visual Display of Quantitative Data? Anybody know that book? Okay, a couple of people. This would not read as a good slide under those books. It's a great book, you should go look it up anyway. There's a lot of information here, and I don't think I really kind of captured it, but it basically shows that stable releases have a duration of one release cycle, which is typically 3 months. It should mainly be for fixes, and the type of people who we see using it would be people with a similar release cycle to DPK, so like OVS, the OPNFE projects. So OVS may say, okay, or for example, a 2.6 release is going to be based on 1607, but they're a month into their release and they find that there's a bug fix in DPK and say, oh yeah, we fixed that'll be going into 1611, but that's no good to them because they've already stabilized back on 1607. So the stable release and the stable branch gives us an opportunity to backport patches and do that. And Yuan Han's been doing a very, very good job of maintaining that, so that looks like that's going to progress. And we'll have one of those, per release. And there's the LTS release, which has a longer, so a 2-year duration, and that'll have fixes in the same way, features with a little asterisk there, because, as I said yesterday, the fixes would, we won't shut the door or anything here unless the community decides, no, we don't want anything except fixes going in. But we have to make these things usable to the people who are going to use them, and in this case it should be the open source vendors. If they say, well, yeah, we really want to get this back, we'll do the work of backporting it and making sure it's compatible, and the maintainer just needs to commit it, then that's fine. So, yeah, I think we've gone through, especially in the other slides, stable and LTS releases. So that takes us to the end of what I have, kind of a recap of what we did, what's happened in the last year, and these are just some topics about what we might discuss here. We get the same whiteboard up and we write these things down and see, where are the pain points for people, what we think we should concentrate on in the next year, what we think we can and should fix. Maybe more what we should fix than what we can fix. We figure out if we can fix it afterwards. But anyway, some things that maybe for discussion would be, yeah, and I just wanted, so there's a couple of guys here from Semi-Half, who you might know them in the community. They worked on down at the back here over by the coffees. They worked on the Amazon ENA driver and on the ThunderX driver here. And they also do training, and they're interested in doing DPK training. Just maybe want to get an idea of how that would work. Also, they're interested in at least gauging to see if people would be interested in DPK developer certification. So, do you want to just talk about that?
Hello. So, my name is Maciej. I work at Semi-Half. I did a couple of DPK projects. Recently, we have upstreamed the ThunderX driver. We tried out the training thing, and it looks like I've got a couple of feedback points for getting new developers into DPK bandwagon. So first of all, there is a very high entry barrier even for experienced developers that did C++ coding but not data plane. So, and that barrier is not easy to overcome with the Programmer's Guide. So Programmer's Guide is for people who already know the PDK and want to just read more. It's not for people who want to learn. So we've got like a couple of talking points. One of them is lack of tutorial, but that talking point is already not valid because we've got a cookbook. And so Mo, so Jay, you did a great job. So I'd like to thank you officially, and you deserve some bravo here, I think. So I was really surprised to see this, and I think so. I support you in requesting to your manager to found printing the book, making a PDF, whatever form you like, all the forms. And the second thing I would like to ask you guys, what do you think about the need for the PDK trainings, introductory courses, or online tutorials? Because it looks like it's becoming a popular topic, like a hot technology topic in certain circles. And it's not difficult for other companies and organizations to jump in, because it's difficult to find an experienced guy, and especially it's difficult to find the training. Actually, the training used to be done like in business-to-business fashion, so it's difficult to Google an offer, for example, or Google the company who is doing the trainings right now. So it's we've put a couple of companies on the website right now, so it can be easier. But so I'd like to gather some feedback. What do you think about the trainings? Do you think it's needed? And the second point is, do you think the certification, sort of certification program would be also needed? The certification could be a good thing, could be a way to spread the hype, to be able to show off on the professional networking site like LinkedIn or something else, and basically to spread the hype that there's a cool technology that people know of. So just a couple of feedback points.
Improvements to documentation, we can always make them, and it can always be improved, just because we can fish around for ideas about what people were the things were. We need a better design doc or documentation around how primary secondary process works, and we also probably need to decide how it works, and fix the slight brokenness that's there. A better way of adding PMD specific features. Tomas also touched on this. We have NIC specific features that one NIC has that probably other NICs aren't going to have. So it's not really worth putting a whole API via the eDev layer in. So that we want some sort of IOPTA-like interface for enabling or disabling these features. Do we just want to leave the Polmo drivers handle that themselves and expose a kind of semi-public API? As developers, we're users too. Do we want Garrett? This came up at the US summit. There was a good few voices in the audience who were saying that they prefer the kind of Garrett way of working. Google test. So our unit test is kind of slightly. It's homemade, I guess. It works okay. But it's kind of tricky to add new tests. We don't see a lot of, we don't automatically see unit tests going in with code, which is something we'd like to see. And one of the reasons is it's a little bit tricky to work with. That if you want to do something complex, if you want to do some mocking or stuff like that. A common tool for doing this, these days at least, is Google Test. It's a nice framework, but Declan sent up some patches on the mailing list. People weren't quite happy with the C++ part of it, but it would be nice to have a more modern unit test framework that we could use. ABI, and we got a good discussion already on that. So these are just general things. So I'll haul over the whiteboard and we'll take some notes and we'll pass it back to the audience. I'll pass this to you.
No reason to change slides anymore. There's a microphone in here.
I wonder if if we have the DPTK version, just like when you type the GCC version, you can see the GCC version. But for the DPTK release package, if we don't know what's its release for, such as 16.07 or 16.04, we don't know the version. So maybe we need to add some library version information for people to know which DPTK they are using. And I think it's not difficult. Yeah.
Do you mean if you have just a library around to know what it was built from? Is that?
I mean, I don't know the version. For example, if you get the DPTK package and you don't know the version, you don't have command to say what's the version. So I think it's important for many users.
Yes, so in distribution, usually if you install your package to the distribution system, you have commands to see the version. So that's why it's also important to, do the work that we can. And I don't know how else.
There's also an EAL flag actually to print out the version. So if you do, test PMD, I think -- version should print out the version.
The EAL has that.
Yes. But the packaging system is probably for binary distributions.
No, I mean,
default way to get it.
Yeah, everything that's packaged, I guess, has the usual distribution way. You're right. The EAL actually has a version thing, and on top, if you just find out of a sudden a binary around, you can still use ELF tools. I mean, but it's not that likely you find a binary without a version. But yeah, nevertheless, so if none of those three tackle your need, I would just say, let us know what the specific case would be. Surely we can make someone. Is that?
Regarding the LTS, when it gets packaged on the Ubuntu's, on the Debian package, it would be nice to have the Git IDs of the backports which have been included. Because
the Git ID of the backport.
You mean it would be nice for us to get the IDs? Or?
No, for the users. So for the users that in applications, just to be. Sometimes we get the binaries. We see the versions, but unfortunately, maybe you and we have seen that many times between some Ubuntu and some Red Hats. There are different logic of backporting. So sometimes on Ubuntu it's more open, so we understand and we can chase with its backport. On Red Hat it's fully black box. We have no information of the backport many times. So it would be nice if, let's say, maybe it's something to be done DPK on the packaging side, but to have the Git IDs list. Because I'm afraid that a road is not maybe, in fact, per distributions.
So actually, whenever we backport a patch, I mean, the future days of an LTS and stable release would almost generalize most of that, because it would just be 16.07.2, and that's kind of it. And our work, which is what I did with you and Hannes, was like, I knew I want this patch, I suggest to integrate it in the LTS. But nevertheless, if we ever backport something that's not even upstream or a patch that was not backported usually, every on top to the basic package, and that's true for every package in any sort of Debian packaging, every patch on top, every backport has an individual patch, and that patch has a header which usually contains the original upstream commit, the full text of original reason, plus the reasoning why to backport that, linked towards the bug in Debian or Ubuntu or both, which explains, the discussion, the motivation, what led to the point. So this list exists just not like a text file, but it's even better because a text file has to be maintained and it will be out of sync always. Exactly. Yes. While when you say, I have installed on my system this thing, you say, if you're in it, you say, there's one command, give me pull LP source, pull Debian source, this version, and you see a kill stack containing just those packages.
So Johan has done a good job of, tracking where the original commits come from, and they're part of the new commit message for the patches. And we will roll those into the release notes for the package. So if we have a 16.07.1 released package, and we should have in a week or two's time, that will have a section at the end of the release note which will say which patches went into this release.
Yeah, and it's also, I know the business of, you look at something and you don't know what it is. Like, this is kernel 3.12, and you might ask the Red Hat friends how much 3.12 or 3.10 in that case there is still left. It's not that much, but there are reasons for all of that. The point is, usually, as Luca pointed out, we're not making API breaks or something, and the development cycle is rather fast for the distribution and DPTK. So the only thing you should get on top is actually fixes, which do not break API. So it's not so super important, but you can get the list. Because I doubt you will ever see like DPDK 1607, which actually is like 1710. If we ever do that for whatever reason, it will be 1711, just called that way in the second thing. So I hope those like trim-relative options to see what's going on helps. Thank you.
A statement first. On kconfig, I'm a big fan of kconfig, just generally because it's a nice WYSIWYG tool that you can go, you can take your defaults for a given platform, and then you can go in and get help and change them in a very obvious way. So I'm a huge fan of kconfig.
Yeah, and also the hierarchical way to stage your things.
Yeah, it makes very logical sense. And on another similar project, BuildRoot, I use it a huge amount. And I don't think there's a GPL licensing issue at all. Like it has a GPL license, and it will produce a configuration file, but much the same way that GCC has a GPL license. So if I make a change to GCC, I have obligations around that code, but I can compile my code with GCC, but that code isn't GPL'd by virtue of having been compiled with GCC.
Do they have an explicit exception for this? Because usually like AutoTools has an exception for generated stuff. GCC has an exception for generated stuff. If they don't have an exception, you get lawyers from the companies going around and saying, actually, well, you can't do that without an exception. If they do, that's fine. But I mean, I'm not a lawyer, but
yeah, somebody with different skills has to check that.
I think it's worth checking because it's a really.
Try to bring it back to life. Question here. Yeah.
So this is kind of a comment from both myself and Thomas, who came up beside me to make the exact same point at the exact same time. That kconfig, we think it's solving the wrong problem. The problem is that we want to get rid of these build time options rather than finding fancy ways to turn them on and off. We'd rather eliminate them. So that was just one thing, first of all. Then the point I was actually going to make before Ray started me was bringing us back maybe to the ABI issue. And one of the points you were talking about in terms of linking ABI and LTS release, I think is something that's a really good idea. I quite like the idea of having, maybe the next ABI macro reintroduced, and then my suggestion would be the first release after an LTS is when we remove that.
Yes.
And if we have LTSs at the end of every year, that means that the first release of every year, which has got a new major version number effectively, becomes then when you break your ABI. So we do 1611 as LTS, 1702 has got a 17 number, break the ABI, but all in the 17 releases could have the same ABI.
That's very great. And it also gives you the longest possible time to stabilize, so it's just what we do actually with testing.
Yes.
So that's my thing, is to link them together and have that so that you break the ABI at the start of each year.
So that's super great. And while we're at that, what about the SO name, some sort of unifying? I mean, I don't even
have any thoughts
choose
on that. I haven't any thoughts on the .so naming, so sorry.
Just a precision about the build config. Actually, I think we just need to configure DPDK for one architecture. When you choose one architecture, let's say you choose ARM, you automatically it will choose a good build time option for ARM. Then if you need more option inside your ARM architecture, it means it must be a runtime option. So we don't need kconfig.
Okay, I would like just to comment on the cross-compilation. I was trying to upstream DPDK to the BuildRoot system, as it was mentioned, and I didn't succeed yet because of many issues like non-standard build system, strange way of building applications. I had to put some install command into the procedure called build, and they told me you can't do this because this is build, not install, and I had to explain that this step is not install, it just builds the things I need to install to prepare the library to build the example applications and so on. So it was not very easy, and also there were some drivers, I think, that couldn't be built. So I had to disable them as a custom change in the build route, and they didn't like it very much. So there are patches in the air somewhere in the build root system, and you can check, you can use them if you like, but I didn't finish this process yet because of such things. And for example, the way DPDK is configured, it looks like kconfig, but it isn't kconfig. It's much different. And when I was upstreaming these Bluetooth editions, they were asking, "Hey, this looks like kconfig. You can use our infrastructure for this." I told them, "No, I can't. It's not kconfig." And they didn't want to understand this. So, yeah, I think it's all from me. Thank you.
Yeah, I was instructed, by the way, if you want to bash at the build system, you should always do it with a French accent, so I got instructed. For all you need to pick it up.
Just a question on the LTS, it was an open question. I'm just wondering, in terms of reworking of the code, we had a presentation before lunch where we talked about significant rework of device drivers. So I suppose my open question would be, how seriously are we going to take redesign and rework of code with regard to maintaining an LTS that we can backport changes for?
So there again, that's just a suggestion. If people can hold back, my suggestion would be align that again with an LTS. Sometimes you just have to rewrite, like the former maintainer is no more here, you have to take it over, you see no way to do it. I understand that. But in general, the best way to kind of align that with maintainability would again be release after LTS is the one that is allowing, that's making the first after LTS likely the most broken you have, but again, it would make the LTSs the best you can get, so maintainable wise with that.
So one you have to stabilize after you change your API.
Yeah, and they have 2 extra revisions to realize, oh, that rewrite was not as good. So just...
Okay, but it also means so that, maybe one release cycle later, from that point onwards, you find it difficult to backport.
Yes, that is the backward maintainability we talked about. They are conflicting, right? It's hard to find a balance, I guess.
So I would say, if possible, do not do a rewrite.
One of the things on, there's loads of edge cases when you start. There's a question back here, Mike. So there's loads of edge cases around what happens in LTS. But so the question is what do you want? Do you want stability at all costs, or?
I think so, yeah. In terms of reworking code, stability for 2 to 3 years.
Okay, well, we could do it with this method. But, yeah.
I'm good with no rewrite, right? The one maintaining the drivers are the one needing the rewrite, and they usually do it not for fun, but for their needs. So one always has to trade off that decision.
Some might for fun, as well.
Because if we're doing this LTS, for the open source vendors and the Red Hats, and we have to make sure that we're doing the right thing rather than doing something that we think is the right thing, but it isn't going to be consumed, because then it's a waste of work. Yeah. So, question down here.
So this is actually a question for Bruce. So, Bruce, so you were commenting on making ABI changes in the first release of the year, and then keeping the ABI stable. So the question is, do you really think that's realistic? So we have a process for a while now which doesn't really stabilize the ABI, it just controls the ABI changes. And we've never managed to maintain a stable ABI for any period of time. So while it's a nice idea to say, we'll change the ABI in the first release of the year and it can be stable for a whole year after that, is that just wishful thinking?
Maybe it is. And maybe that's the feedback that will come back from it. But I also think that our current ABI policy doesn't control things very well. And I also think it makes it far too easy to break the API. Because right now the policy is that, you give 1 month's one release deprecation notice. So you send your patch up and, oh yeah, this breaks the API. Oh well, I'll just wait 3 months.
Yeah, so that's actually...
There's no big pressures to go and find a better way to do it.
In that sense, we're all just little kids still. So we do everything we're allowed and break at least 1 rule more. So we're not breaking hundreds more. So if the definition of the process changed and it's more clear, that's the way it works. It works in so many other projects, also handling device drivers. Look at the kernel. They're not killing each other every time. Well, they don't have a sense of an API, but still.
So
it works.
that's one point. The second one is I think we would also need that sort of next ABI macro as well, so that you can still get your patches in. They're not. It's possible to keep the ABI stable, and it makes the packaging easier, but you can still test new ABIs as well. So I think we do need some sort of compromise, but I also very much think that what we have right now isn't working, and I also think it's too easy to break the ABI, and we need to make it a little bit harder.
I have two questions. First, can we agree on one thing? The current model, the current policy for ABI, I would say it doesn't work, or no, it's useless. Is there someone here to say that it's useful to keep the ABI of one lib and break the other one in the same release? Is it useful for someone? Just someone?
It's hurting, that's at least what we...
For who?
For us, it's hurting. You would bump all together, would be much better for us. So if anything changes, bump all of them, like a shared SO name for all of them.
Okay, so we can agree since at least 1 year we are trying this policy for nothing. Okay, it's a disaster, but that's okay. We can agree on something. That's okay. Yeah.
Regarding breaking one or multiple libraries, could it be, from a theoretical point, if you're not using a library that's breaking and the other ones are stable, it's better having them separate. So, continuing on that thought, if you separate a core library and then the supplementary libraries, it would make sense having one core library version and then maybe separate for the assist libraries, but definitely one core library version with the core things.
Okay, and on the other side, I have a question because I'm seeing that the VPP and OVS upgrading when DPDK is releasing. So it means they are always using the last DPDK version. So what is the point of maintaining an API or an API if there is no user for that? I mean, when you upgrade DPDK, you can upgrade the user of DPDK. That's maybe a point of view. I have another comment. You talk about the RT next API macro, but what do you mean? You package by disabling this macro, so you have no new feature which is using this macro, but you still want a new DPDK for what? For one or two new feature? Why are you not using the stable release for that? You see what I mean? That's really a question.
I'm not sure
I couldn't follow completely. So
if I got your question around OVS, I think the thing is, yes, OVS will upgrade every time there's a new release, but it creates a really bad impression in the OVS community that, and it hasn't been every time. There's been maybe 2 occurrences in the last couple of years where we haven't had to, change stuff because of API changes. But OVS sees as a new version of DPDK, oh, here's the patches to update the API, and they just see it. They see it or perceive it as just a continual churn if there's no stability in the API. And just because one time it was for this component and the next time it's for this component, and just because there was a note 4 months earlier to say it was going to happen, doesn't really make any significant difference.
And I think it also tends to drive away more developers of applications. Should we support DPDK? And if the general perception is that it's very unstable, the API breaks every 2 weeks, I think it tends to scare away some potential application developers in that sense.
So I have from the developer view, I have comments about the library for command line. So generally we use the test PMD to do the function test, and we define a lot of command. And the command, if you define an argument for this command line, and it is a mandatory, cannot be optional one. So I just want to have the small comments that can we have optional arguments for the command line definition. Yeah.
You mean a command line option changing the behavior?
Yeah.
Well, it's not matching an ABI thing, unfortunately not. It's part of the binary nature.
Yeah.
So
it can be runtime.
No. But in terms of testing, you would usually have two ways. You would have the normal, more continuous integration and stabilizing thing, which you would test and build without that, and all the distributions and consumers would do. And you had the common stuff along continuous development, which they would usually build with the option enabled and test their new features in there. So that's why that always was a development, a compile time switch. And if reintroduced, it would still be one.
I have a comment from a developer perspective. So essentially, when I started pushing patches, two things which I hit, it drove me mad was one, map file changes. I simply couldn't understand when I should change the map file, where I should change the map file, should I touch it or not. The second one was the ABI changes. In fact, one of the patches which I sent broke the ABI, and somehow after the patches were accepted, I got to know they broke the ABI. What if, before sending, and assuming that we are going for a distributed CI model, what if before sending the patches, I could have gone through a checklist stating that, okay, you should check this, check this, check this, check this. Yes, there are two lines which are written in that place, that is run the check patch and run the git log. That is mentioned somewhere in the documentation, so I ran those, but the other things are not mentioned. So if we are going to have a distributed CI, this is the first thing we should have, a proper checklist. A person should not submit without those.
And in general, if whatever way it ends up changing the usual way you want to update API, or even since Bruce put out the discussion, or Thomas, if you even want split versioning or not, I mean, we have different opinions, but there's not yet the sense of settle. If that changes the behavior of the map files tremendously anyway. So we'll have to see. I mean,
yeah, the map file usage, I think it is documented, but not in actually the contributors guide. So yeah, that should be fixed.
Yeah. It's a new question, so if you're following up, let's hear you first. Okay. DPDK, at the risk of stepping on many toes in this room, DPDK is a relatively young product. Bugs are still being fixed in core components. For instance, the chained M buffers, are they supported by all libraries without bugs? The reason I'm asking this is that we, as a manufacturer, would use a stable version, select the version, and stay on that for a long time, maybe backport bug fixes into the version we selected.
Which is even what the stable version does for you. You just can participate as yourself and the others.
And that is my question. Is DPDK at its current stage, or the coming release that will be long-term support, is that at a quality where it makes sense to make it long-term support, and vendors like my company would choose that and stay on it? Or is it still, well, we still need some of the new features and they are interesting, or?
I'm good giving an outside answer since I'm not part of DPDK itself. It's one that's supposed to be the right to be chosen. And it's a matter of the community to make that true.
It's just, it's a waste of effort if there's no sense that it's really good now. I'm just.
The LTS is supposed what you pick up for like a product that you want to serve for a longer time or something, just as the other releases in between are the ones to develop new features and exploit new things. That's just the split that most projects do between LTS and non-LTS.
Yeah, I mean, as vendors, we support even older version of DPDK for years already, and
it's just always a trade-off. I mean, as a vendor, you're in a different position, but speaking for any sort of distribution, it's always a trade-off. So it's a community effort. So if there's a bug identified and it's not part of the usual stable maintenance anymore or something, it's a trade-off of is it open and just stays open until somebody volunteers to do it, which sometimes happens for a low priority something. While on the other hand, which is a good reason why Luca mentioned all the security things, if on anything that we're facing, you end up with supercritical whatever, somebody usually has to stand up and do that fast. So the LTS structure...
For anything, it's just for the bad publicity that you will get, right?
Yeah, and yeah, as much back as you do, and so that's just, and the LTS is about coordinating that effort. So instead of you and 20 others in the room and their relative do that, we do that together. Yeah. And that's the reason why that should be the right one to pick for those things. Because you get from others and they get from you.
Bruce? Okay, yeah. The thing about the LTS is, at least we have a plan now for that. We're going to have to see how, over the next year or two how it plays out. But I'm still a bit concerned about the ABI stuff. It seems like we've got some sort of consensus from everybody that what we have now isn't good enough. So I've thrown out one suggestion. I'm just wondering if there are some other suggestions that people can come up with so that we can actually look towards a solution rather than just all wringing your hands and saying what we have isn't good enough.
You mean, yeah, the question sometimes is, if there is no other alternative, the question falls back to, is the new alternative at least better at what we have?
Yeah, I mean, but I'd like to hear some more suggestions other than my one, which is Big Bang after each LTS.
Yeah, I think
so
we should close out on this, at least get a decision. We've got about 10 minutes left, but this is very important, so, you know,
So that's my query is, can we have call for suggestions from the audience?
Yeah.
The C++ developers are maybe aware of the Boost libraries. They have a similar problem, or always had a similar problem. They have a huge variety of interdependent libraries, and their SO version is, I think, changing with every release. That also solves the packaging problem, because if I remember correctly, they add the date string also to the SO version. At least some of the distribution vendors do that.
What library do you use?
Boost.
Yeah, Boost is usually Boost 1.58, Boost 1.56, something. But that's just what I mean. Part of the source that you distribute is that. But for that you need that the libs that come out of Boost 157 are not file conflicting with whatever follows 155.
But this is something that the distributors are doing, and I think it's just, I mean, it's your choice. You don't have to package it all into one package. You can do multiple sub-packages.
Oh, it is.
I think that's just a technical detail.
It's already sub-packaged, just like in Boost.
That you have there, right?
So you were discussing what you're now supposed to implement, right? Huh.
No, you can go over it once more, so yeah, that would be good.
Okay, well, mine was pretty much, it was very similar to what was presented earlier, whereby we would have a stable ABI across multiple releases, finishing with the LTS release. And after each LTS release, we would at that point allow all ABI breakage. And we would also have, during the time of the stable ABI, we would have again the next ABI macro, which could be used for testing out future ABI breakage. And then after the LTS goes out, we remove all instances of next ABI and we're completely switched over to the new ABI, plus any additions following that LTS release. The advantages I see for this is, the way things are looking right now, you can determine the ABI version on the basis of the year number, because the LTS is the last release of the year, so your ABI break is the first release of the year, so 17.x is all the same ABI, assuming you compile the next ABI off. And it gives you the longest period of ABI stability, because you finish with your LTS, which gives you effectively, 3 years then of ABI stability. So that was my suggestion. I hope it's clear. And I also hope it's workable. I mean, Tim has a valid point that it may not be workable, but what we have now I think isn't working. So that's why I'm looking for other suggestions in case there's something people think is more workable. But I want to try something else.
So two questions, or keep the microphone.
Okay.
So 2 clarifications. So the way I understood the LTS is there's an LTS release every 2 years.
Okay.
Not every year. So
still
then
if
you extend your proposal, so would you
I would still say
the
I still break the ABI every year. I think going beyond that is way too long, given the pace of change in DPDK. I think it's unrealistic to expect people to hold ABI changes for 2 years. My way of thinking was the current ABI policy was done whenever we were doing, I think, 3 releases a year. So the idea was, whenever we started with it, it was 3. We're now at 4. So basically our ABI stability window has shrunk even since we started that policy. So this would push it out a bit to nearer the time scale of ABI stability it was when we first started the policy. But yeah, okay, if there's not an LTS every year, I still think breaking the ABI once a year is what we should aim for.
Okay, and the second question then, just to make sure I understood it. So if you want to change, just take next year as an example. If you want to change it 1705, 08, or 11 that changes the ABI, it has to be controlled by the next ABI macro.
It has to be controlled by next ABI macro, or function versioning, or some other mechanism such that you can still get a backward compatible ABI until the following ABI breakage release 1802.
That can use the map mechanism to write the old stuff along the new one. If you want.
So there should be multiple ways to skin that cat, I think.
It would be interesting to know from DPDK users if they think that's a workable model or not.
Yeah, I mean that's why I'm looking for other suggestions as well.
At least the next ABI macro, it often applies for small changes, but if you do a big rework like I did for mempools, or like maybe it will come from one day EL memory, or it can't apply, it will just mess the code. And, how do you do for that cases?
I'd reiterate that point because we had a case where we were doing the external mempool manager, which we tried to work under the next ABI, and as far as I remember, that didn't work. We put up the patches. It didn't work, but it was far too messy to be accepted upstream. Also,
that I actually think is a perfect case in point, because that was perfectly doable. It was just rejected because it was messy code, and we could just wait 3 months and get it in. And so we chose to break the ABI and not keep backward compatibility because it was just a 3-month wait.
and the other thing I'd add is we're going to have 2 test paths now as well. We're going to have basically 2 versions we're testing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Look, it may not work.
So on that RTNX ABI, so if you do this massive on the first release, you have to keep track for the rest of the year, testing both paths. Why don't you keep LTS 1 year, do backports or things that don't break ABI, and then just break ABI in any other release during the year? It's the same. That's basically the same, and we don't keep the next ABI.
Yeah, if that helps people. I mean, every year is kind of the scheme that seems to be okay.
Question over here?
Yeah.
From
please, yeah, okay, sorry. Just one suggestion. We are talking about the timing of the LTS, but it was just a suggestion to make an LTS every 2 years. If we want more LTS, we need only one thing: more workers on the LTS.
You need a maintainer.
More maintainers. And honestly, I guess that at least Canonical and Red Hat could do more LTS.
We're running out of time, Frank.
To do more LTS, we need LTS. And we have a plan to staff people to work on LTS. So, but we need to have the LTS to work on LTS. First thing. Second thing is regarding LTS scope. We really need to have OVS DPDK and VPP people's view. And off the record, Nokia, Ericsson, Huawei, ZTE, China Mobile, and others. Because you have the open source, but okay, I'd like to get their feedback as the VNF vendor. So.
Well, I mean, the intention isn't to make a decision here and roll that out. Like this will be.
Yes, exactly.
An RFC up to the list, say this was proposed, and then people can.
Yes, and for sure you will have official feedback by Red Hat there because.
What do you want to share with us now? Like what Red Hat wants, so we know. So
what Red Hat wants is VPP and OVS to have an LTS based on an LTS DPDK. That's what we want. That's very, very simple. And in this LTS, during the life cycle of this LTS, if there is a new cool board just for one PCI ID that is rolling out at Dell and a telco wants to deploy, I'd like to be able to deploy it, basically.
Sure. It's reasonable. Okay, we're out of time in the interest of giving the people from the other thing. Have we one last question? Yeah.
At least, and I think there is a VNF vendors list on C-suite, so we have some.
We're going to limit it to the number of French people who can ask questions in the next.
Wait, I stop. Go ahead. Until now, I mean, we are not using the Unix distribution. I think we will not until 2017. I mean, we package our own DPDKs because there are many questions and issues for the maintenance, for the performances, because .so is has some issues sometimes, even if we started to use it at 6Win. So clearly, LTS versions will help. We want to see that, but for sure, it will take time. So 17 will be a start to look at it. But I strongly believe that at least our production release will not use it before maybe 18. So clearly we build, we have test frameworks for that, we have some people working on it, but I don't believe we will consume the LTS during 17. It's going to be very, very, very difficult because we need to be sure that, it works after a long period of time.
Okay, yeah, thanks for that. All right, I think we'll bring it to a close. I mean, we can take this back to the mailing list. We've had some good ideas, and thanks everybody for the proposal. But just one last thing, I'd like to thank the two guys here and the OSV, other OSV maintainers, the Red Hat guys, and the guys who aren't here today, for the great work you've been doing and kind of keeping us honest and improving the quality. So yeah. Okay, thanks everybody.